Everyone in the luxury restaurant froze when the billionaire pointed at the young black waiter and mocked him in front of the entire room. Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, echoing off the golden walls. The waiter's hands trembled, but his eyes didn't break. And then, he opened his mouth and replied in flawless Chinese. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The air turned heavy. The billionaire's face drained of color, and the room was silent. But what the waiter said next didn't just silence the mockery. It changed everything. Would you have had the courage to speak up? It was supposed to be just another shift. David, a hard-working young waiter, moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease. He wasn't rich, powerful, or famous, just a man who took pride in his job, making sure every guest felt seen. The restaurant was dazzling that night, filled with silk suits, glittering jewelry, and the quiet hum of wealth. For David, it was routine, smiles, service, and silence. But behind those smiles, he felt it sometimes, the stares that lingered a little too long, the whispers that weren't meant for him to hear. Still, he pushed it aside, focusing on the work. Tonight, though, one guest would push further, a man whose words weren't just cruel, but calculated. And in that moment, David would be forced to decide, stay silent or speak. The night was busy, every table filled, every seat occupied by powerful men and women who barely noticed the waiters weaving through the room. David kept his focus, steady and professional. But as he approached the table in the corner, a group surrounded by bodyguards and flashing watches, he felt the weight of eyes on him. At the center sat a Chinese billionaire, a man known for his fortune and arrogance, someone who seemed untouchable. When David leaned in politely to pour the wine, the billionaire smirked. His words came sharp and cold, laced with mockery. He pointed at David's dark skin, laughed, and tossed a cruel remark in Mandarin, assuming no one else could understand. The men around him erupted in laughter, their voices rising like a cruel chorus. For a moment, David froze. His heart hammered in his chest, his face burned, and he felt the sting of humiliation in front of the entire room. Every instinct told him to keep quiet, to swallow the pain like he always had. After all, he was just a waiter. They were billionaires, politicians, people with influence. One wrong move could cost him his job, maybe more. But something inside him refused to bend this time. He steadied his breath, his tray trembling slightly in his hands. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the grand hall. A manager looked away, pretending not to hear. The other waiters avoided his eyes. Alone, cornered, David stood there, mocked for who he was, as though his very existence were the joke. And then he spoke. In flawless Mandarin, David repeated the billionaire's insult word for word, his tone steady but laced with quiet fire. The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered above lips, but never touched. No one expected it. The billionaire's smirk faltered. His laughter cut off mid-breath, replaced with shock. And before he could recover, David continued, still in Mandarin, calmly but firmly telling the man exactly how cruel and demeaning his words were. His voice carried acros. The billionaire's face flushed red, his pride cracked open for all to see. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound sharp and violent, demanding silence, demanding control. But David didn't flinch. He stood tall, his voice steady, his Mandarin flawless, every word a mirror held up to the man's cruelty. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Phones were raised, cameras recording. The humiliation was no longer David's to bear, it was the billionaire's. And that realization made the man furious. He leaned forward, spitting words, his voice dripping with arrogance, threatening David's job, his future, even his safety. Security guards moved closer, tension thick as steel. For a heartbeat, it seemed the weight of wealth and power would crush him right there, silence him the way silence had claimed so many before. But David refused to back down. His hands no longer trembled. His voice grew stronger. He wasn't just defending himself. He was speaking for every person who had been laughed at, looked down on, treated as less. The air was heavy, charged with something more than fear. It was defiance. And then it happened. The billionaire tried to respond in Mandarin, but his words stumbled, his tone cracked, and the crowd saw it, his mask slipping. The man who mocked another for his skin, for his place in the world, was being undone by his own arrogance. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel this time. It was different. It wasn't at David. It was at the billionaire. And in that moment, power shifted. When the shouting ended, David was escorted out of the dining hall. For a moment, the silence felt like defeat. But then he saw something he didn't expect. Guests nodding at him, whispers of respect, and even a few claps that dared to break the stillness. The video from that night spread online within hours. Millions watched a man who was supposed to be invisible stand up and turn humiliation into strength. David didn't become rich. He didn't suddenly gain power. But what he did gain was something far more valuable: the truth of his voice. His act of defiance showed that dignity cannot be bought and courage cannot be silenced. For the billionaire, the night was remembered not for his wealth, but for his downfall. A reminder that no amount of money can protect a man from the truth when it's spoken out loud. But this story isn't just about David or one arrogant man. It's about every moment racism is brushed aside, every time silence feels safer than resistance. It's about the cost of speaking up and the even greater cost of staying quiet. David's courage reminds us that racism thrives in silence, but it shatters when someone dares to confront it. The question is, if you were in that room, would you have joined a laughter or the silence? Or would you have stood like David and made your voice heard? Because the truth is, the story doesn't end here. It continues every day, in restaurants, on streets, in offices, in schools. And what happens next depends on all of us. So, when the laughter fades, when the silence feels heavy, whose side will you be on?